Hello and welcome to Roundtable. A new law going through the British Parliament could create a two-tier class of citizenship, giving powers to the Home Secretary to strip some, mostly immigrants, of their nationality, with little opportunity to challenge that decision. Almost 500 people have lost their citizenship over the last 15 years, mostly those who've gone overseas to join terrorist groups. Are the fears of 6 million naturalized citizens overblown? Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Now imagine going away on vacation or business and then attempting to catch a flight back home and not being allowed on board. It could be the first time you find out that you have been stripped of your citizenship. Right now, the controversial UK Nationality and Borders Bill, which recently passed through the House of Commons, is being debated by the upper tier of Parliament, that is, the House of Lords. Clause 9 of the bill gives the Home Secretary the power to revoke citizenship without notice, as it puts it, conducive to the public good. Campaigners say these new powers would make it harder for those who've been deprived of citizenship to appeal against the Home Office's decision. Well, the Home Office insists that those deprived of citizenship still possess the right to appeal. According to analysis by the campaign group Free Movement, at least 464 people have been stripped of their British citizenship since the law allowing it was relaxed 15 years ago. Home Office figures record 175 being deprived of their citizenship on national security grounds and 289 for fraud. In a high-profile case in 2019, Shameema Begum, a UK-born teenager of Bangladeshi descent, had her citizenship removed after she joined Islamic State. While the British government argues she is not stateless because Bangladesh considers anyone born to a Bangladeshi parent to be a citizen from birth until the age of 21, Bangladesh has refused to accept her. The bill also aims to tackle illegal immigration and inadmissible asylum claims made by undocumented people. Well, let us welcome warmly to our roundtable shores Steve Valdez-Symonds, Amnesty International UK's Refugees and Migrants Rights Director. Then we see Shoaib Khan, human rights lawyer, and both of them are in London. And finally, we say hello to Emilie McDonnell, who's from Human Rights Watch UK. Great to have all three of you with us. Now, I know you all believe that this is wrong, what the UK government's doing, but I'm going to ask you to spell out precisely why and what you might do in return. So I'm going to throw this question out first of all. Steve, you want to pick up on it? Do you agree that in certain circumstances, any country has the right to deny citizenship to those that it believes are intent on causing it harm?
Well, let's be clear. It's not about denying citizenship. It's about taking it away. If that power is to be used, it certainly should be in the most extreme of cases. And one of the problems that we have currently in the UK is that the power has become very widely available. The other key issue is that it should never lead to someone being without any nationality at all. And I'm sorry to say the UK has extended its power to being able to deprive someone even where that would make them stateless. And what we have in the current bill in front of us to top all of that is not a further extension of the power per se, but rather the ability to exercise it in secret so the person doesn't even know it's happened and can't do anything to challenge it.
Okay, those are your basic objections, but I go back to my original question, which was, do you think, and I'll rephrase it slightly, that a country has the right to remove citizenship from those people that it believes are intent on causing it harm?
Well, in international law, it would suggest that in very constrained circumstances, the answer to that question would be yes, although I must say, it's a very old idea. And if we are really to invest in citizenship, it would be far better if countries were to accept the responsibilities of having citizens. Yes, dealing with citizens who misbehave in ways that are appropriate within such things as the criminal law, but depriving someone of citizenship is certainly a very extreme power to exercise.
Okay, Shoaib, I'm going to come to you in a moment and ask you about any particular cases, because you are a human rights lawyer, any particular cases that you may well be dealing with in relation to this, indeed whether there are any. But Emilie, let me come to you first of all and pick up on what we've heard from Steve and from my original point, which is effectively, if you don't like what somebody's doing and you're having a party, you've invited people in, surely you have the right to ask them to leave.
So our position is that we're not saying that the government cannot deprive someone of their citizenship, but that all individuals have the right to due process and to challenge that decision and to ensure that that revocation of their citizenship was lawful. So essentially what the bill purports to do is to take away a fundamental right by hampering their ability to even challenge the decision. And it takes away all due process from those individuals. So yes, the UK government does have the right, as Steve said, in exceptional circumstances to deprive individuals of their citizenship. But it's extremely concerning that then those individuals will not have the ability to challenge the evidence and the facts that the UK government has against
that's very
them.
different to what you said. That you said the UK government was not allowing them the possibility, it was hampering them from appealing against this rather than preventing them from doing so. That's the case, though, isn't it? It's just difficult if they don't know they've been stripped of their citizenship until later, but they do have the right, according to the government, to appeal against it, to take it to court.
Yes, that's correct, but it effectively renders the due process protections null. Rights have to be effective and due process protections have to be effective. And when someone doesn't know that their citizenship has been deprived, they'll be out of time. So effectively, they won't have an appeal if they're fallen out of time to actually challenge that.
Okay, Shoaib, let me come to you. And this is part of what we were hearing from Steve at the beginning about and the number of cases, the extreme cases that there are. You're a human rights lawyer. Are you dealing with anybody who, if this bill becomes law, would be in the position of perhaps losing their citizenship?
Yes, I don't think it's necessarily about cases that are ongoing. The whole point is that now that obviously this is becoming law. So the point is that there's going to be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people who would potentially be exposed to it.
But that word potentially is the most important, isn't it? Because the government says it will only be in the most extreme cases.
I think that just depends on how much you trust the government to actually keep its word and what do they mean by extreme cases. And another thing is, generally we have these, I would say, quite general terms in law about, whether someone's presence is conducive to the public good, whether the Home Secretary approves of someone being in the UK, etc. And I think that's something that Parliament really has to debate and which isn't usually done. So what does that mean? How extreme cases? What do we have in mind? And I think that's something that really needs to be defined, made specific, and it generally isn't. As in this case, the law going through, so the House of Commons has already passed it, but we still don't know what do they mean by that, and is that something that we just leave to a Secretary of State, potentially any government, any future, and the current Home Secretary, just to decide who she doesn't deem to?
But it is possible, is it not? It's been passed by the House of Commons. It's now before the House of Lords, the upper chamber. The House of Lords can recommend changes. It then goes back to the House of Commons. What chances do you think there are of getting amendments to this? Because I'll go into something in a moment where the government has changed its mind. But what do you think the chances are of changing this Clause 9, which is the one that you're particularly worried about?
I think personally, I think it's hard for me to say what the chances are, but I do know that there are many in the Lords who are seriously opposed to it, who have spoken against it, who are campaigning against it, who are trying to change MPs or House of Commons members' minds. So it's hard to say, what will happen. But I think, but on the other hand, obviously we have the government. This is their, a landmark clause that they brought in, something that the Home Secretary is really keen on, something that they really want to pass. And obviously, that they have a majority in the House of Commons. So, I don't know what I can say about the chances. But it's just not something that even if as Home Secretary or someone had suggested it, it's just tragic that the House of Commons actually passed it.
Steve, let's go back to the number of people, because you talked about it not being used very much in the past, but now it's coming to the fore. A number of people stripped of British citizenship since 2006. We've got a graph here. 2006, only a handful. That's up to 2010. The next 2 years, hardly any at all. Then 2017, it rockets, coming down considerably in 18 and 19 compared to 17, and in 2020 at round about 50, 1/3 of the number from 2017. What is it that saw that massive spike in 2017, and why do you think it's come down since?
Well, the law was changed in 2014 to make the power even wider. In fact, it had been changed in 2006 to widen it at that time. So I think what you see towards the end of the 2010s is the government having expanded the law in ways that enabled it to deprive significantly more people that it evidently decided it wanted to, and did so in the years that followed. I think what your graph won't show is that if you went back to the 1970s, 80s, 90s, you would see that between 1973 and 2002, this country deprived nobody of their citizenship. And we can see, therefore, how the extension of this power, first in 2002 and then in the years that I just mentioned, has increasingly captured ever more people and leaving them with their citizenship stripped from them.
Okay, well, I would like to suggest that what you don't see in that also is the fact that 2017, when it peaked at around about 150, 155 or something like that, now come down by 2/3 on that. But in 2017, that was a time when there was a lot of concern about British citizens joining ISIS and ISIL or Daesh. Doesn't that demonstrate that this is used at times when a country thinks it is in most danger?
Well, I'm not convinced about that. I mean, let's be quite blunt about this. The discussion about citizenship deprivation in recent years has focused very heavily on one particular person, although she's far from alone, being Shameema Begum. Now, there is the situation of someone born in this country, a British citizen, grew up here, grew up nowhere else, groomed effectively in this country, leaving this country as a child, who found herself in awful circumstances, no doubt behaving very naively in the decisions that she made aged 15 years old, let's not forget, and now completely abandoned by her state and her government, who quite frankly failed her because they didn't stop the grooming that she was exposed to that led to her making that terrible decision to travel to Syria. So no,
well, surely difficult to look at every single citizen in this country and prevent them from being groomed. That is a problem, but I'm not sure that it's one that has an answer to it. But Shameema Begum is of Bangladeshi descent, and the government has argued that she should go to Bangladesh rather than come back to the UK.
Well, I think that's an appalling position for any state to take. And what it effectively is to say is that some of us citizens who happen to have the nationality of another country because of that country's laws that relate to either our parents or our grandparents, that allows this country, where we are born and grow up and are connected, to deprive us of citizenship in circumstance where our neighbour, who's no less connected or no more connected to this country than are we, could not be deprived. That is not having a citizenship that ought to be respected. It is not full and equal recognition of our citizenship, and it's an insult, frankly, to the citizenship that we share.
I'm going to play something now from Gurpreet Singh, who's Secretary General of the Sikh Council UK. Let's hear what he has to say.
They have the ability to clamp down on people who they feel are a problem. Now, this doesn't mean that that person is a criminal or they've done something wrong. That person could be someone who's just arguing against human rights in another country.
Emilie, where does that leave innocent people? Are they at all likely to be targeted, as Gurpreet Singh is saying there?
Well, I think one of the fundamental things regarding the introduction of Clause 9 is that it makes every British citizen potentially vulnerable to these sweeping powers that would be introduced for the Home Secretary. It's wrong to think of this just as affecting those who are trapped in northeast Syria. We don't know how or when it will be exercised, and it will disproportionately impact first or second generation British citizens, so effectively non-white ethnic minorities. So it makes all of us vulnerable here in Britain, and we don't know how it will be used, or the varying, very vague provisions that are currently on the face of the bill, how they'll be interpreted.
But isn't that just the fear of fear itself rather than a realistic concern?
Well, we've seen, as Steve has mentioned, that there have been cases where the courts have declared it unlawful when citizens have been deprived of their citizenship and either the person has been rendered stateless or the various conditions not met. So it's a very real risk that first and second generation British citizens may be targeted. And again, as Steve said, I think we shouldn't just be relying on assurances from the Home Secretary and the government that they won't exercise it in this way, because they're ever increasing powers and more individuals are being stripped of their citizenship.
So let me put this to you. Some of the concerns that have been raised have come from what's known as the Windrush generation. I'd like you to explain to those of our viewers that don't understand what that is, who belongs to that generation and why those concerns have arisen again.
So effectively, there were individuals who came from Caribbean countries they're called the Windrush generation. And it's been strongly criticised by a lot of British MPs, but they were deporting and making threats to deport Commonwealth citizens, many of whom who had been born in the UK, had lived and worked in the UK for decades, and they lacked official paperwork, essentially. And, then they're rendered second-class citizens, and many of them were children when they arrived, lacking status. And effectively, you're saying that these individuals are second-class citizens to the UK.
OK, but explain to our viewers whether any of those, because the government, I think, has sort of admitted that it made a mistake with this in suggesting that these people should leave the country. Have any of those been permanently exiled, if you like, sent back to islands which they felt they had very little affiliation with? Have any of them actually gone there and been forced to stay there, or has the government changed its mind on them?
Well, the government has basically said now that they've reversed their decision and they should be having protection.
Doesn't that mean this government's flexible when it comes to things like that it can admit it's made a mistake?
Well, of course, any government is flexible in admitting that they've made a mistake, but I still don't think we should be taking the assurances of the Home Secretary in this. If the Home Secretary is going to only be using this power to deprive citizenship in the most exceptional circumstances, then that should be on the face of the law rather than relying on general statements from the Home Minister. OK,
Shoaib, let me come to you on this one. I wanted to save this one because you are a lawyer, and it fits in with one of the first questions I asked you, which was about sort of changes in heart, changes in mind and policy. Just before Christmas, it was reported that the government had changed one of the most controversial elements of this bill, and that was, it said it had previously been prepared to prosecute those people who helped out any migrants that were in trouble at sea. In other words, let's say a fishing trawler went to the aid of a boatload of migrants who were floundering in the water in a collapsed dinghy. The owners and the skippers of that trawler could be in trouble. Now, that has gone away. So it shows that there is a weakening, if you like, of the more extreme positions, more extreme government positions.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, can I just say, I mean, how appalling and disgusting and inhumane was even that suggestion? I mean, who in the right mind would ever come up with that suggestion? So basically, we're going to penalize them in prison or punish people for saving human lives. I don't care what that situation is, let alone it's just because, you're entering a country without papers. But I think that was appalling that was even suggested. But yes, I mean,
that's gone away.
Yes, luckily. Yes, that has gone away. But that's the thing. I don't think that's something that needs to be campaigned about or people need to point out to the government. I mean, sort of similar to this question you were just asking about their flexibility on Windrush. So that's hardly flexibility. I mean, we had cancer patients who were refused treatment, even though they were perfectly entitled. We had people who, I'm sure there must be many, who have been deported and they haven't been brought back. They're not in touch. They haven't been able to come back. There are many who died. So essentially exiled from their country, this was their country, and that's the whole point. They were British citizens. They came here as British citizens. They should have been treated that way, whether or not they had passports or not. And in fact, it was the Home Office that actually lost their landing cards, lost their records, and didn't know where those people were or who they were.
Do you think there are any elements of this bill which is intended to deal with the whole situation of immigration and nationality that actually stand up to the kind of scrutiny that you would put on it?
I don't think so necessarily. I mean, I think that's the thing for many, many years now. Every government, and obviously, every government that comes in, and we've had so many elections in the past decade or so, everyone who comes in, because this is one problem that they know voters are interested in, people want to see action, and there is no action because they have no idea what to do. I mean, we had our European allies, others who we could have worked with, and obviously, we've completely abandoned them. They're refusing to work with us now. So, for instance, we used to have the Dublin Convention, which was a law that said if someone has claimed asylum in another European country and they have an asylum claim there, even if they make their way to the UK, they can be sent back there because that's where they first claimed asylum. So that's gone now. But what they've done is just put in the most extreme cases. So whether it's about saving people's lives, whether it's about the whole definition of asylum seeker, the whole point is when someone arrives in your country, they make a claim, you look at, is your life in danger? Would you be suffering persecution back home? But instead of looking at how did you come here? Was it a small boat or a large boat? Were you actually driving the boat or not? Those are things that shouldn't really matter. And so, yes, I mean, I don't think there is anything really here that would stand up to proper scrutiny, or that is actually a humane change that was needed.
Sorry, Shoaib, we've only got a few more minutes left, and I want to bring Steve back in at the end of this. I'm going to come to you in just a moment on whether you think there are elements of this bill that actually stand up to your scrutiny. But first of all, this from the immigration minister I mentioned earlier, that's Tom Pursglove. A proportional, this is clause 9, and sensible measure that doesn't increase the scope in terms of individuals who it would affect. This is about a very, very small number of people every year who are high harm individuals who want to hurt people in this country. If that is the case, why is it being reported that 6 million people to whom this law could potentially apply are worried about something that is, in all likelihood, only ever going to apply to a handful?
I think that is because people recognise that the power to deprive that the minister says is so constrained has been expanded so significantly several times in recent years by successive governments, and always with disproportionate potential impact to Black and Asian and other ethnic minorities in this country. And if you add on top of that what this bill will do, the power to exercise this in secret, the risk, therefore, that this does affect someone, including someone whom it has no business exercising this power against, but simply because it is exercised wrongly and someone is singled out wrongly, but does not know and therefore cannot do anything about it, potentially until it is way too late, is all the more alarming to those people who've been brought within the power's scope.
Can we end on a positive note? Because I read in the bits and pieces I was given about each and every one of you that Steve, you thought elements of this bill were okay. It was clause 9 you objected to particularly. So what do you think they've got right, perhaps?
Well, I'll be absolutely clear. Everything from clause 9 pretty much is an absolute disaster and is just thoroughly shameful. There are 8 clauses in this bill which are thoroughly worthy. We strongly support them. They are about restoring citizenship rights to people who have been wrongly deprived of them for decades and, in some instances, generations by discrimination and injustice in British nationality law. If the bill had had continued in the way that it starts, we would be strong supporters of it. I'm afraid, unfortunately, exactly the opposite happens from clause 9 and onwards.
And that's where the headlines have come from. If 8/9 of the bill was good, who inserted the 1/9 that you disagree with? Where did the pressure for that come from, do you think?
Can I just be clear? It's not the 1/9 I disagree with. The clauses 1 to 8 are a small minority in this bill. Clauses 9 to virtually clause 70 are disastrous. They're disastrous for British citizens, they're disastrous for refugees, they're disastrous for victims of human trafficking. This is a thoroughly disreputable bill in all but its first 8 clauses. And that shows the intent of this government. And nothing can hide the fact of its bad intent on all of those particular measures, even despite the thoroughly good provisions in those first 8 clauses that we absolutely must see passed into law.
And those first 8 clauses, do you think they were well-intentioned or put in there just as window dressing or as a disguise of what else might be coming?
No, I think they are well-intentioned and strongly support them, but they can't outweigh. This is not a one thing or another. We need those first 8 clauses. We just don't need what else can be seen here.
Thank you, each and every one of you. Thank you very much for coming on this edition of Roundtable. I hope the fog has cleared just a little bit for those of you who've taken the trouble to watch our programme. And for doing so, we thank you very much indeed, wherever you happen to be. We'd love to have your company next time. Until then, from me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team. Goodbye.